If someone were to ask you, what is the most important miracle that Jesus performs in the Gospels, what would be your answer? Now, one might immediately say, well, of course, the greatest of all would be the resurrection. There's no greater miracle than that. But keeping the resurrection as the resurrection and classifying the others as the miracles of Jesus, what would be considered to be the most important miracle? Now, I would add a word of caution here, because everyone, I suppose, has a tendency to name their favorite as the most important, the one they like to hear the most, their favorite of the stories. But perhaps one of the ways to consider what is the most important is how often that story is told between the four evangelists. There are certain miracles that you find only in certain Gospels. For example, the 10 lepers, the cure of the 10 lepers, is certainly a favorite. But we hear that miracle only in the Gospel of Luke. Two rather important miracles, and certainly favorites, would be, say, the wedding at Cana or the raising of Lazarus. But as important and well-known and popular as those miracles are, those are found only in the Gospel of John. One might say, well, there's the great catch of fish. And that would be perhaps a good guess, because 2 out of the 4 Gospels mention that miracle. Luke places it at the beginning of Jesus' ministry and attaches it to the call of the first apostles, including Peter. John places it at the end of his Gospel and attaches it to the resurrection and also the commissioning of Peter to feed my lambs and feed my sheep. But there is, in fact, one miracle that is found in all 4 Gospels. And that is the miracle of the loaves and the fishes. In fact, over 4 Gospels, we hear of this miracle 6 times. 2 Gospels, Matthew and Mark, speak of this miracle twice. So is it the most important miracle? I don't know. But it certainly is one of the important miracles, as all 4 evangelists speak of it, and 2 of them tell of it twice. Each of them take their own approach to it. Some give certain details, others not. Perhaps a detail we're the most familiar with is the detail that it was a boy who donated his food, of which Jesus multiplied the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. But that detail is found only in the Gospel of John. And John doesn't just leave that Gospel on its own. But if you hear the response of the people at the end and the conclusion that they draw because of this Gospel, it speaks somewhat to what John is doing in his own presentation of the miracle of the loaves. And what is the people's response? This is truly the prophet. Now, if we listen to the 2nd book of Kings, the story of Elisha, we see the similarity between the prophet's action and Jesus' action. Jesus, in multiplying the loaves, is hearkening back to the tradition of the prophet. And not just any prophet, not Isaiah or Jeremiah, not even Elijah, who is the father of Old Testament prophecy, the image of Old Testament prophecy, but rather an action of Elisha, who was the student and protege of Elijah. Before Elijah was taken up into heaven in the fiery chariot, Elisha asks him for a special favor. He says, "Give me a double portion of your spirit." And it is Elisha who inherits the role of prophet from Elijah, who inherits the spirit of prophecy from Elijah. And it is that prophet that Jesus emulates in today's gospel. One who inherits the mantle and the spirit of prophecy is now seen in the example of Jesus and the miracle of the loaves and the fishes. But not only that, while he is hearkening back to the Old Testament tradition, Jesus in John's Gospel is now projecting into the future. Because this Gospel is found at the very beginning of the 6th chapter of John, which is noted for being the Eucharistic chapter of John's Gospel. Now, we might think of the Eucharist in terms of the Last Supper, in which Jesus gathers with his disciples, breaks bread, and says, "This is my body, this is my blood." But try and find it. You look in the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John is the only Gospel that does not have the Last Supper. He has the washing of the feet. In fact, the only Gospel that does have the washing of the feet. But he does not have a breaking of bread over a Last Supper. Rather, chapter 6 is his Eucharistic chapter in which he says, "Eat my flesh and drink my blood, for my flesh is true food and the bread of eternal life, and my blood is true drink and the wine of eternal salvation." And he uses this miracle as the springboard that leads him into his great teaching on the bread of life. And so in performing this miracle, a lot is happening, reaching back to the Old Testament tradition of prophecy and projecting forward to the sacramental ministry of the church, in particular, the sacrament of the body and blood of Christ. And so listen to that passage and these readings of the gospel over these next few weeks. We will hear that teaching develop, sometimes even ending in cliffhanger as Jesus brings a new twist to that teaching as the 6th chapter develops, leading up to the reaction of the people and their ultimate response to this teaching. You won't get any spoilers here. But if you want to read ahead, I won't stop you. But it begins with this miracle. Is it the most important miracle? I don't know. I'm sure it's debatable, but it is certainly a very important one that is heard 6 times over 4 Gospels. But of the one time it's heard in the Gospel of John, there is so much that is attached to it. So let us not just simply see today's Gospel as yet another story that we hear about Jesus. Let's not hear of this miracle as just another miracle in a collection of many miracles throughout the 4 Gospels. But rather let us see the depth and the substance of this miracle that Jesus performs in relation to the tradition that he now inherits as our Messiah and will pass on in the sacramental ministry of the church that is encompassed and centered upon that great sacrament of his flesh and his blood, the food of eternal life, the cup of eternal salvation in the body and blood of Christ.